welcome to the Digital Digest, your weekly breakfast of insights, tips and tricks, and general information that will help anyone trying to move things forward in this digital world of accounting. As always, we're brought to you by the Digital Disruptors, and we're trying to continuously push the boundaries of the digital accounting space. I'm your host, and on this episode, I'm joined once again by Ryan, which is great to see. And we're going to see if we can kind of close out our little mini series that we've been doing over the last few weeks in terms of covering, the kind of key things that you need to think about from an accounting firm point of view. We've talked about, just a quick recap, we talked about why it's really important to sort of think about IT technology in your firm. We've even touched on AI, because of course you can't do a conversation like this without talking about AI. But we also touched about on the internal systems that your practice might be using, the options that you've got out there, the challenges that are still out there in the market as well. And then we're going to touch on now on sort of the what you do about your internal and external IT provision, whether you go fully internal, whether you go external for totally and have a service provider, or whether you maybe have a bit of a hybrid of both, because quite a lot of firms do that as well. This will obviously depend on your scale and the size of your practice, but also what your challenges are and what your expectations are going forward. So Ryan, morning, how are you? And let's dive straight in, shall we?
I'm good, excited as ever to be talking about tech, and especially for accounting firms, given our roles and our involvement really in the internal IT of and driving that forward in accounting firms. So I guess my perspective on this is that, as you said, John, like if you're a smaller firm, you generally always kind of outsource this stuff, and then once you kind of grew to a certain size, it made sense to bring it internally because you could hire people on a full-time basis and it became cheaper. Now with the transition as businesses move into the cloud, the traditional roles of an IT team, IT contract from a consultancy perspective has evolved, and you've got different requirements and therefore different probably structures you need to consider. And I'm excited to talk through maybe some of the areas that are becoming more critical than they were in the past. I mean, both of us have gone through some huge change like recently, John. So, like from your perspective, what are you starting to see, or what are you starting to consider that was different maybe from a few years ago?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess first point is like, I mean, as hard as it is to tell, both of us have been in the industry for close to 20 years, so we've seen quite a lot of transition in our time, and I guess you made a really good point about the fact that businesses now, particularly smaller practices, I guess, will be potentially almost entirely on cloud products, and so. Oh dear. So this concept of having servers and physical infrastructure in an organization that you definitely would have had at least probably 10 years ago is different for sure. I think for us at the moment, where we're focusing, we're a mid-sized firm. We've got about 300 people. We're definitely still in that kind of hybrid environment. We've got some stuff on the cloud. We've still got some stuff on premise, even though it doesn't necessarily mean that our servers are in our offices, because we've actually got them hosted somewhere down near Gatwick Airport, I think it is. And so we have effectively a way of logging into that remote desktop environment and virtual environments. And but our longer term view, I guess, is that we want to move to pretty much having everything on the cloud, because we feel that's the direction of travel for most things in our world. We think that will reduce the load, and it reduces the sort of some of the requirements that we'd have. And I guess there's cost implications, there's security implications of doing all of those things as well. But we also have now moved to having a fully outsourced IT service team, having switched from having an internal one pretty much with some additional support around specialist areas, and that was a significant change for us, because that was something that internal IT support function we'd had for as long as I can remember, and predated me by quite a long time. And I think really the reality of that was, in our specific circumstances at least, is that we felt that the team and the requirements that we had were not keeping up with some of the technological advancements that we'd experienced, they weren't maybe contributing to projects in the way that we wanted them to, in particular as we were going through change management processes. And so we moved to this fully outsourced function where we feel like we've got more technical expertise that we can draw on. A little bit like the reason why businesses come to accountants, for example, is you can get into a firm and get tax expertise and audit expertise and accounting, VAT, etc., etc. We kind of took the same view, really, is that we needed a much more broader range of support and experience. And we needed some more support where we didn't have some of those functions. So project management being one, some of the infrastructure challenges that we were facing as well at the time. So a whole bunch of reasons why we got there.
Yeah, I mean, similar journey. So we had a traditional internal IT team, the ones that are insanely risk averse. Their entire job is to lock everything down, so no data can go anywhere. But as you want to evolve as a firm, especially with what's going on at the moment, that approach really restricts your ability to innovate. So we then tried a new team, completely kind of not tore that up, but when the structure isn't working, so brought a different essentially IT team in. Just realised I've gone very dark in this room for some reason, and tried that, but we hit the same sort of barriers, right? Everything moved from talking about the future to mitigating risk. So a couple of years ago, I think maybe 3 years ago now, time's flown, we outsourced pretty much the entire of our IT function. So strategy, project management, training, support, pretty much entirely external to a third party. But did identify there were some challenges with that. And a lot of it was feet on the ground. We were used to people being able to walk down, anything urgent, walk down the corridor and grab someone and go, help me, my computer's not working and it's really time critical. And then I guess also, as well as that, is understanding the nuances and mechanics of the accounting firm and the challenges that represents. So, they might be able to do a project, implement something, and from their side, it's perfect, but it's just not being utilized internally because you've got that resistance. You've got people just trying to go back to their old ways, and without that cultural understanding and seeing it, it bodes a different challenge. So are you of the mindset then that it is possible to outsource everything? Because obviously that's the route we've gone
down. I think you could do, and I think absolutely that works. I would say there are one or two caveats over that. So I think probably the biggest caveat is that I think most outsourced IT providers do not necessarily specialize in accounting practices, which means that they do not necessarily understand the accounting technology environment maybe in the same way that you and I do, Ryan, and lots of other accountants will do. And so that's clearly an issue that needs to be sort of considered, because if you've got CCH or Digital or Iris on-prem, and someone comes in and then they've got to manage and maintain that, keep it up to date, etc., they may not be fully across that and the implications of that, and may not even understand how business critical that is to an accounting firm. So there's an education element required there, but also they may not necessarily be aware of what the direction of travel is. So as we sort of talked in the outset, like most firms are moving towards the cloud. Most of the products and the vendors that we're using are trying to move to the cloud, as well. And so I think there are probably elements of the strategic side of IT that you probably have to retain in-house, or maybe have to consider how you address that. And you do that in partnership, right? It's not exclusively something that you keep to yourself, but you do need to make sure that's planned, because what you don't want is your managed service provider coming to you and saying, right, okay, well, you've got this server here and it needs to be renewed next year, and you've got in the back of your mind, actually, I'm going to move completely off that and move to something else, and so you've got a bit of a conflict. So you just need to kind of plan that. But it comes down to communication and sharing that knowledge and information, and helping them to get upskilled if they don't necessarily have the knowledge in all of those things.
Well, I guess what you're kind of implying here is that strategy, though, the overall where is the business going, is not outsourced. You're controlling that internally. You're kind of got the understanding. You'll take advice, probably more on the security infrastructure side, maybe externally, but the firm itself and the maybe key individuals inside the firm are those that are still controlling strategy. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think actually it's probably more collaborative, because part of your technology strategy isn't just about the functional stuff that you're using day to day when you log onto your laptop or whatever. It's also about, what are you going to do about cybersecurity? What are you doing about the laptops that you give to your members of staff. How long are you keeping them? What kind of specs do they have? What recommendations are you going to take on those? And so, if you have outsourced that side of things, then you then need to draw on that expertise to be able to make that work. And I think for a lot of firms, cybersecurity is probably quite close to the top of their list in terms of things that they're talking about. And I think we touched on that in the last episode, in terms of some firms, in terms of their core accounting stack, if you like, are sitting on the hands a little bit, and we're just waiting to see what's happening in the market. But what they're doing instead is investing the money that they've got in security and cyber and lots of other places. And so again, you do need to have a strategy about that. And this is why you bring in experts, because then they can sort of say, right, okay, well, it's not just about having a firewall and putting an antivirus on everyone's laptop anymore. It's much more sophisticated. There's lots of other things that you need to consider and think about. And then you can kind of build that into your budgets and your strategy going forward, and figure out what the right things to do at the right time, and how you minimize your risk. And I know we talked about risk management with an IT function, and risk management within an IT function traditionally is just to say no to everything. Actually, it should be about saying yes, but. And then saying, right, we can make this happen, but we need to consider this, this, and this, and what the implications are for the business. And I think finally, just without sort of laboring this point too much, is like most accountants are not technical people from an IT point of view. So you do need someone that can articulate these things in a kind of consumable fashion, and just sort of say, right, this is why, that clunky 10-year-old server that's on its last legs, and we just keep sticking a sticking plaster over a gaping wound here. This is why you need to spend 5 or 10 grand on upgrading it, and this is what the implications will be of doing it. You don't need to talk about the SANs and the hard drives and the memory and all this kind of stuff, but you just need to get that message across about why it's worthwhile making investments in particular things, and what the impact of those investments would be.
Yeah, definitely. And it always has a financial impact. That's the challenge, right? It's weighing up what you want to achieve technically against actually what you've got the money to do. But I think something we should touch on is, I guess, the evolving roles of IT, or the positions inside an IT department. So we go back, I guess 20 years, John, when we were starting our career, and we're new to the world and fresh-faced. It was
you and I both look the same, surely, Ryan. Come on.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Well, probably. I've not really changed. I might have had hair when I started. Surely that can't be right. So, it's very much around infrastructure. It's very much around support. That was kind of the main two elements. But as I guess it's changed to now, because now so much is pushed into the cloud, they've taken a lot lower priority. You've got project management, change management, training, and the evolution of that. And now also new roles that didn't even exist back then, such as data analysts, which I know you've gone down the route of we at Scrum Bland have. And we're seeing huge returns early on, purely from bringing someone in that can see this huge volume of data that you've got in an accounting firm and bring it to the forefront in a way that's a lot easier to digest and utilize. Now, are you seeing that same trend? Because that's where I'm kind of seeing it. And then that is probably why most firms are having to reassess the structure of their IT department, because they're kind of built on, the old method.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right there, and I think your summary is pretty accurate as well. I mean, I think some of this just comes down to your strategy, because, for example, if you've got an on-prem set of servers which are in a pretty decent state, and that you're not going to be switching off those in the next 2 or 3 years, that then surely feeds into your wider technology strategy in terms of your move to the cloud for whatever products or for whatever reasons. And so that you need that infrastructure role, and those support roles for a period of time. That may change once you kind of come out the other side of that. But I think you're absolutely right. I think some of the other new roles that we've seen as well is more of a focus around security, cybersecurity. I know, kind of laboring that point a little bit, but it's sort of top of my mind because we're making investments in that at the moment. And that's possibly an area where this concept of doing penetration testing, this concept of like I say, thinking outside of just a firewall and maybe some other stuff, and having phishing campaigns running within your business in terms of and training people on phishing how phishing works and stuff. That's all fairly new, and I think that's something that a lot of firms have been bringing in over the last few years. I think the other thing is that as well, some firms are spending more on additional IT skills, like you say, around data, but also maybe around sort of elements of software engineering. Some firms have been doing that for a long time. In terms of being able to build either in the cloud or build into SQL databases, but also being able to sort of try and stitch some more of these products together, whether that's through automation platforms or whether that's actually doing the coding themselves. And firms are definitely thinking more about that because of their frustrations, I think, with where the market is at and the limitations that they're coming up against. I think that's something that you guys have explored both internally and with third parties as well, isn't it, Ryan?
Yeah, and you can, the stitching together, right? You still need to identify early on, okay, what strategically are we picking? Because we may want to pick two solutions that already have a good relationship, share data effectively, but that may not be, I guess, the traditional best of breed approach. And there is a route now you can go down best of breed, but spend a little bit, maybe invest, I guess, in key resource to fill those gaps, mean that you can go down the route that fits exactly the USP that you are trying to deliver, and not necessarily to your clients, but culturally, internally, and then have a way to customize that, bring in automation, and increase efficiency. It's quite a new approach for maybe the mid-tier. I think that the larger firms in the UK have been doing this for a while, and will change from when I've been to some of these accountancy IT events. Is some of these firms have built such a customized platform that trying to pivot into anything else now is the challenge. So I always think that, especially where we are now, is that if you're going to build anything, build it small and fix a small gap, something that isn't going to make a fundamental difference to the system you choose. You can still plug and play something else if you need to, but will fill a hole, and over time, probably iteratively, save a notable amount of money.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting point you make, actually, about that customization of products. And I've seen customization of a lot of different products on-prem and in the cloud. And you're absolutely right, is that I think sometimes firms go down that route because they do have the skills and the capabilities to do it. But then the longer term implications of that is that number one, you've got to support that, so you've got to maintain that skill set within the organization for a long period of time. And that's something I think about with my team, with my data and digital transformation team, is that I've got a software engineer who's an apprentice, and when he qualifies, I'm fairly certain he's going to get lots of exciting job offers from other people that we might not be able to compete with. And so my longer term strategy is to kind of infill those skills that we'll miss at some point potentially in the future, just in case. And that does also then lock you into that product for a period of time, potentially longer than you might wish to be locked into, which is also a consideration. And so the difficulty is kind of like then figuring out, like, what's my tipping point between moving from one thing to another. And if I've built so much bespoke things within this one product, can I replicate that or reproduce it in the other product? Either because it's part of the feature set, or I'm going to have to build it myself. And what changes does that have from a change management, a process systems point of view, and the whole wider implications of those things?
Definitely. And the bit that I have seen repeatedly from firms, the bit they always go, they kind of hang their head in, like, they're feeling the pain years on from exiting something, is when they've tried to move on to a big system. Normally it's a CRM. Normally it always starts with a CRM. They try to do something very custom, like a Dynamics 365 or Salesforce, when they had to invest hundreds of thousands of pounds to get to something, and ultimately it's then just failed. So they've just got this kind of burning, what's the term? Basically, this thing where they're like, they've been burned. They're like, I don't want to do anything like that again. Like, it's not been a long enough time for us to consider a system, because like the pain was so much, the outlay was so much that there's no way we want to go through that again. And that's something that's hard to avoid, and where going more towards out the box, and sometimes sacrificing in certain areas that you can fill in with little bits of code, is worth considering nowadays, rather than trying to find a system that does everything. Is that something you look at when you're looking at products now?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, it sounds like one of your IT guys in the background there has got a support ticket you can't deal with. So it's it is absolutely something we think about. I mean, obviously from a sort of an ease of use or a management point of view, if you can buy products that will connect with other products, I guess the classic example is maybe getting something like Dext and Zero, is that from our point of view, that in theory should just work, and 99.999% of the time it does. And if it's ever a problem, you kind of kick it back to them to kind of deal with, and so it's not our problem ever to sort of deal with and resolve. And I guess that's the thing that you're looking for, isn't it? You're looking for like, what's the minimum impact of having something like this, and understanding what do those sort of integrations and things look like and how do they work, so that we can make better use of those. And I think that's one of the other things, is that when you've got a lot of products in your in your practice, and again, we're starting to see this with a lot of firms, is not really looking to go and add more to their technology stack or their apps and things like that. Is actually to try and squeeze more out of what they've already got. And I guess, again, that's probably the responsibility of either someone like you and I, Ryan, or someone in the IT department to kind of assess that and go, right, are we maximizing the benefit, and is that right? And I think that sometimes, again, we're having that outsourced, or even having an internal resource who are really just there to be honest, maybe keep the lights on and just provide support. They don't always think about maximizing the benefits of what you've got. And again, that comes down to someone maybe in an operations type role or a project management type role, or even, as we're increasingly seeing, people in like CTO and CIO roles, to kind of encourage that kind of thinking and sort of going, right, let's make sure we're getting the most out of everything we've got, at the lowest cost, I guess, at the lowest risk.
Yeah, I mean, the default, right, is, oh, this system isn't working for us, we need to pivot on something else. And yes, I think this IT problem is going to last a while from the sounds of it, so my apologies to everyone listening. But there is something I think that's important that we touch on before we get towards the end of our show, and that's the importance but risk associated with data. So everyone is, nowadays, data is the new cash, the new kind of gold. Everyone wants as much as they can. They can use it. We've seen what some of the big businesses have done to really maximize the effect of their collection of data. But it also comes with a huge risk. And the problem with accounting firms, and what we're starting to see now, is that for years there's always been this excuse that we don't need to ever delete anything because it's all pertinent to everything we do. So we're just going to collect endless amounts of data, keep it for a very long period of time, then back that up for a really long period of time. So essentially, it's never gone. So if a client from 70 years ago, I don't know, that's an extreme example here, but 70 years ago goes, oh, do you remember when we purchased that product or that property? Any idea how much we paid for it? Yes, I can find that out. Well, that's now become a problem because accounting firms are starting to get basically sued if they have a data breach where they've not got a proper data deletion policy. And this is something that's becoming more and more critical for, especially, I guess, those growing firms, those ones that aren't maybe a 1-2 man band, those that are moving into the mid-tier space and beyond, is that they need to be assessing not, I guess, what we've got, but how are we disposing of that and how are we disposing it automatically. And not only that, but how are we changing the culture with our clients so that they're not expecting us to have those documents forever. It's their responsibility to keep it if they need it. We're just there to facilitate the, I guess, the manipulation of that data and the passing back of the final work. And I'm finding that this is becoming probably the most pertinent issue now, as well as where is my data stored when it's in the cloud. Those two things are the things that really I'm finding firms are going, okay, this is the thing we need to make sure we've got ironed out. And I don't know if that's because the PE investment coming into the sector, and they're, maybe they're looking at data from a risk perspective and going, how do we assess this? And that's kind of spreading out. Or if it's just firms are like, we've now moved on to cloud products, but we never asked the questions back then. We really need to consider it, and that's generating a wider discussion. But is this something that you're experiencing in your firm and others that you speak to?
It is, absolutely, and I think it's a relatively multifaceted issue. But I mean, as accountancy firms and most businesses, we've always had a data a data protection requirement. We've obviously got a whole bunch of ethical standards that we've got to comply with, and of course, we're quite often dealing with confidential data. So, I think throughout my career, there's been a focus on, don't leave laptops on the train. Make sure if you've got a USB stick with data on that you keep it on your person, and don't leave your laptop open when you leave your desk, and all those kind of things. And I guess we've kind of focused around compliance for quite a long time. I think GDPR has had a big impact in terms of it's made people more aware of what happens with your own personal data and by extension business data, and that then feeds into where is data being held, and all of the regulation and requirements around that. But yeah, data retention policies. I mean, that's probably my biggest bugbear internally, because we have a data retention policy, and maintaining compliance with that internal policy is a real challenge, because you've got the thing about accounting firms is we have data in lots of different silos, and because quite often a lot of our systems are not connected, it can be quite challenging to keep on top of that. Plus I guess, probably not untypical for a lot of firms, we are moving from an on-prem environment with servers and shared folders and drives and all sorts of other things to a cloud environment, into SharePoint. And there can be some real skeletons in the closet in terms of some of those old shared drives and stuff, and even people's emails and things like that, which might have been on an old Exchange server, and managing all of that is incredibly challenging. And by no means easy. It's not kind of you just write a policy and then just you don't think about it. Like implementing these policies is incredibly challenging. I think the other part of the data challenge for a lot of firms is that I think we are still quite a long way off educating our staff, not just about the compliance issues of data, but actually the importance of good quality data. And I talk about this quite a lot. Well, moan about this probably is more accurate. But this simple thing, like a client emails you today and says, "I've changed my phone number," and that phone number just stays in your emails and never actually makes it into the CRM or the practice management solution or wherever else, where it'd be helpful for your other colleagues to know that person's changed their phone number. And quite often we have fairly arcane processes around how you would go about changing that, which is one of the other reasons why, because historically we've locked down these systems, so I can't go in and change phone numbers, for example. So I have to go through this convoluted process of, emailing someone in Outer Mongolia who fills out a paper form that posts it to somewhere else, that then gets processed by someone else, and then 5 weeks later it's been updated. It's those kind of things that I think firms really need to understand around not just the compliance issues, which are a headache, but also around how do we instill in our staff the importance of really good quality data, and why it's so important to the practice in terms of providing good customer service, being able to make data-driven decisions, being able to rely upon the information and systems that you're looking at. And if I can extend this into another bugbear of mine, timesheets for practices that do them are a classic example of, more often than not, that's the Jackanory time. That's the only time, for me at least, where accountants get to express their levels of creativity when it comes to filling out your timesheets. And you'd be amazed at how many people in our place do 7.5 hour days, irrespective of like whether they've worked 10 hours or 5 hours. And sometimes we've seen timesheets filled out into the future based on what they've got planned on the resource planner, which is fascinating to see. But there are real issues around data, and I'm being sort of slightly tongue in cheek about it, but it's a double-sided thing, right? We've got compliance issues on one side, which are clearly very important, but we've also got the more practical implications of data in our practices, and really how do we make sure we manage it? And whenever you do a change project, these data challenges come right to the forefront, because you have struggles with consistency, you have struggles with the way that things have been set up and managed, and that in itself can be a full-time job maybe for somebody new in the IT department.
Yeah, I don't envy that person's job. But no, I agree with you on all of that, especially timesheets, mate. It's sometimes boring in accounting. You want to be creative, right? And I'm one of those frustrating people that put way more than, I actually put down the hours I spend and then somehow get questioned
Outrageous.
about it. It just encourages you not to. Yeah, it encourages you not to do it, doesn't it? So, look, we're coming towards the end of this. I think it's probably worth picking up a couple of things that are takeaways. So, what is probably your key takeaway for anyone that's watching, listening to this, from considering should we either bring this in house, outsourcing it? What's your takeaway, John?
I mean, I think for me, it's really about assessing the skills of what you've got. So whether that's internal or external or a hybrid, is really kind of going right. Do you feel comfortable that you as a practice leader or someone who's operating in that space, in terms of having responsibility for IT and technology, are you getting enough advice? Do you feel educated enough from the people around you so that you can make good strategic decisions going forward? Have you got, if you do have an internal team, have you got the right training in place? Are they keeping their skills up to date in the same way that your accounting, bookkeeping staff will be doing? What is your strategy, in terms of your existing technology, now and going forward, so that you can really plan into this and don't forget all of the issues around cyber, around data, around compliance and stuff. And I think one thing that we haven't really touched on, which again we could touch on in the future, is like are there opportunities to maybe think about how you would price for your clients based on the security and data requirements that we all have to deal with, because it is becoming more and more costly, and I'm seeing budgets in firms increasing significantly when it comes to IT spend.
Yeah, definitely. The balance between people and IT has been shifting inside accounting firms over the last 10 years. But yeah, my key takeaway, I think, is the situation's changed. Don't be scared of outsourcing IT anymore. There are really good people out there that can do that and do it effectively and know the industry. If you want to focus down something on that, it probably comes with a slightly higher cost because they're specialists. But it's something that is worth exploring, especially if you feel like you're stagnating as a firm. The one thing I would always say, though, as a caveat to that, is I wouldn't advise pushing your strategy out to them. Take consultancy, take information in, but control the strategy yourself and dictate the terms, because you ultimately know where you want the firm to go and the speed you want it to go at. And the faster you want it to go, the more you have to invest, but essentially the quicker you get the return. So the balance is always important.
Absolutely. And I think, Ryan, as always, that feels like a great place to wrap up this week's show. So hopefully, for those of you watching, this episode has provided you with valuable insights that you can take forward. Please do check out the show notes for any links to digital disruptors and anything else that we might have mentioned or may be useful for you to reference. And if you want to ensure that you catch future episodes, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you look out for the release on a Thursday morning. And we look forward to speaking to you next week. Thank you and goodbye.
Awesome.
Nice one, mate.